Good morning, this is Karen Johnson, and my guest today on the Proctors History Project is John Scherer, who is chairman of the Proctors History Committee.
Historical Committee, yeah.
Historical Committee. And this is August 26, 2013. And John, tell me how you got involved in this committee.
Well, it was very roundabout. I had a talk, a program that I gave music halls to movie palaces, and I was to give that as an educational program. I'm not sure, maybe it was an association with Union College or something, and they decided it would be kind of nice to have it at Proctor's Theater. And so I worked with Audrey Hughes, who was at that time in charge of PR for the theater, and we offered the course, and it was in the room that's now the Guild Room. And I've been trying to think of when this was. It was in the 1980s. My guess is it was probably around 1985. And we did this program, and then Audrey was telling me about this history committee that was here at Proctor's and wanted to know if I would be interested in being on that. So these things sort of happened at the same time. We gave this course here. I think it was a two-night course, like a Thursday night one week and a Thursday night the next week. Gave it in 2 parts. And I got involved with the history committee at that time. And I remember one of the first things we did, which sort of corresponded with the course I gave, was to do a tour, an excursion of the historic theaters in the Capital District. And we hired a bus. In fact, I think we had to get 2 buses because we had a lot of interest in it. One of the members of the history committee at that time was Francis Poulon. He was a Schenectady city historian, and he worked at the city archives. And he and I put this excursion together. I think he was on one bus and I was on the other bus. And we went to the Troy Music Hall, and we went to the Cohoes Music Hall, and we toured those theaters and the Palace Theater. And then we ended up here at Proctor's and had a behind-the-scenes tour here as well. And I think some kind of a luncheon or something. So it was very successful. We had a good time. And that's sort of how I got involved with the history committee here at Proctor's.
You met the whole cast of characters and they liked you.
I guess I was roped into it.
So, well, you have a strong background in the preservation of history. You were working at the State Museum. Tell me about what you did there.
That's correct. I was working at the State Museum, and the presentation I gave came as a result of a presentation I had put together for the museum many years ago. And I also did an exhibit, Music Halls to Movie Palaces, which traveled throughout New York State using the museum's wonderful collection of theater memorabilia, including these large Strobridge posters from the Great White Way, Broadway in the early 1900s. And so that's sort of how the connection I had with it. I also remember several years after I got involved with the history committee, we did exhibits, and mostly in the little museum. We have a little museum on the balcony level of the theater, which used to be the theater manager's office, and we have that open before productions and during intermission, and so people stroll through. And we change those exhibits every year. But I remember one year we had access to the cases down in Proctor's Arcade. And so we got a part of that traveling exhibit that I had did, Music Halls to Movie Palaces, and we occupied the arcade with it. And that was very, very successful.
Well, it's been a wonderful thing to have this history committee. And as I understand, Billy Pemberton, one of the volunteers that we both worked with, was the first president.
Yes, Billy was the head of it at the time, and Helen George was the secretary. And Billy had such a flamboyant personality. We just sort of hit it off very well together. she was truly a character and a fashion plate. I remember when she passed away, they gave her age. I can't remember what her age was, but I couldn't believe it because she looked about 20 years younger than she really was, and she acted that way too.
She was a wonderful force here, and I think that the History Committee welcomes any members that want to join that have an interest in local history.
Absolutely, and our goal is to preserve Proctor's history, and we do oral interviews, oral histories like we're doing today, and we have quite a collection of those that have been done, some of them as long ago as 20 years ago, interviewing some people. I'll never forget the time that I think you put us on to this Ray Norton, who was at a nursing home nearby.
The Glendale home.
The Glendale home. And he had played the organ here at Proctor's shortly after it opened in the late 20s. I think it was 1928, 1929. And so we interviewed him. But we not only interviewed him, I remember bringing him down here to Proctor's on stage so that he could actually play the organ again on stage. Now, this man is in his 90s at this point. And we decided to make it a media event, and we invited the press, and all 3 local TV stations were here, and it was quite a thing. He was great. At 90 years old, he sat down, he played the organ, and he talked about his memories here at Proctor's in the 1920s. So that was one of the more memorable things that I remember.
So the History Committee has stuff that you've kept, and what do you do with all your stuff?
We do, and all of the stuff that Proctor's probably would like to throw out, we scavenge.
Okay.
Yes, like old playbills, old records from the theater, particularly from the time of ACTS, the group that actually gathered to preserve the theater, to save the theater. And we have programs from the very first production, which was Blackstone. And we've tried to save playbills from every year and from practically every production. We also have the stills. We keep the still photographs that the publicity department gets. And they often get window cards, posters, and still photographs autographed by the stars that appear. So we have quite a nice collection of those that we bring out on exhibit every now and then. Another major collection that we've gotten was the Jim Anderson collection, this gentleman who used to come to the stage door here at Proctor's and wait for the stars to come out, had them autograph photographs for him. And he had a huge collection, and he donated that collection to Proctor's. And we make use of that in our exhibits, too.
I remember when he used to put his exhibits up, and they were like dolls and autographs and photos.
Yes.
And just watching people watch this in the arcade, they were fascinated by it.
He collected these dolls, too, of famous stars. And he's got big collection of things from The Wizard of Oz, and autographed by the Munchkins and other people who... We also have the actual script that was used by one of the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz, and that's what we're going to be featuring this year in our arcade window.
So if I come to Proctor's, from a public point of view, there are 2 ways I can share in this committee. One is through the windows in the arcade.
Yes.
Which your committee puts together every year.
And exhibits in the museum.
And go to the museum, which is open when the theater is open.
Yes, and we have members of our committee staff the museum during performances so that we can talk to the public and give them some personal history of the theater. And another purpose is we also have people who come in who remember, who went to the theater as kids back in the 1940s and 50s, and we like to hear them reminisce about that and maybe even take down their name and address so we can talk to them later. We've had past ushers come through. We've even had a couple past vaudevillians come through the museum theater. Yes, so we collect that information.
So if anyone who might happen to be seeing this is interested in being included in our oral history project, they certainly should be in touch with you and
absolutely
we'll see if we can engage them.
And I want to mention that the museum is called the K. Rosendahl Museum, and K. Rosendahl played a very important role in the preservation of this theater. And although I didn't know Kay when she was involved with the theater here, I met her a number of years ago. She was a member of the Mohawk Golf Club, and a friend of mine, Midge Hayden, who we bought our house from, was a member, and Midge would invite us there for brunch on Sunday every now and then. And so it was at one of those brunches when I actually met Kay Rosendahl, and we had a very nice chat.
Well, that's great. Now, there are tour guides at Proctors. What's the relationship of the tour?
That's another organization, but we help out with the tour guides when they have big parties. We have done things for various groups of people, like the Theater Historical Society and other Mohawk Antique Auto Club. When groups of people want a tour of the theater, the people of the historical committee will help out the guides in touring the theater.
So there's a lot of preservation of history here. I mean, we've talked to the people that are involved with the organ. That's one way we're preserving history of our special theatrical history.
Mm-hmm.
And the tour guides who will do tours for just about any group interested.
That's right, that's right. And some of the things that we have in our archives harken back to the early days of the theater. I mean, people are amazed to hear some of the performers who performed on the stage here in the past, you know, like George Burns and Gracie Allen, Red Skelton, and the theater manager books that we have in the collection from the 1930s have their names. Like, it will say George Burns and Gracie Allen. It'll say where they're staying, the Van Curler Hotel, and where their trunks are to be delivered after they perform here, because these vaudevillians, you see, in the early days of the theater, you got not just a movie, but you got maybe 5 or 6 live acts as well. And they were always looking for fresh entertainment. So these vaudevillians, they were constantly traveling. And they would only be at the theater for maybe a day or two, and then they'd move on to the next theater. So probably the best emblem of a vaudeville performer is a trunk, because they would travel with these trunks. And we have some of those in the collection too. Some
Great.
vaudeville performers who were local, who performed here at Proctors back in the 1930s, and we have some of their scrapbooks, and we have a vaudevillian's trunk. So
It's wonderful.
we are protecting the heritage of the theater.
And giving the public a chance to really see what we have.
Yes.
And if they were interested in being more involved, they certainly could just call Proctors and we'd put them in touch.
Absolutely. We're always looking for people. We have a big project of cataloging the collection. We're putting it on the computer, and eventually we hope to have that up online so people can actually go and see what kind of material we have here in the collections.
That must be a couple grants down the line, right?
Exactly. That's where you come in.
Well, fortunately we have a new young employee of Proctors who writes grants, who's very interested in seeing if he can expand our knowledge, because we do so much in historic preservation of the building.
Yes.
And now we want to save the actual history. So anything else you want to tell me?
No, I think that's about it. We do have a wonderful storage area now. It's taken us a long time to get that storage area. It's very well organized, and you know, if you're a member, we can take you on a tour of the storage area and show you what we've got.
Thank you so much for your
You're
time
welcome.
today, and I hope all who are watching will enjoy this information about our Proctors Historical Committee.